grew up playing the basketball with the boys, so like it's always been physical and feisty, and like that's what it is. You got to find a way to hold your own.
Caitlin Clark. Just moments ago, news broke that no one expected. The WNBA's most talked about rookie has suddenly stepped away, leaving fans in shock and teammates searching for answers. Speculation quickly followed. Was it tension with leadership, an undisclosed setback, or simply the overwhelming pressure of superstardom? Cameras captured Sophie Cunningham's voice shaking, while Lexie Hull wiped away tears, their emotions reflecting the weight of the moment. The arena felt frozen, the silence unmistakable. What could drive a player who changed the league overnight to make such a choice? The Caitlin Clark mystery has only just begun. Just days earlier, Caitlin Clark wasn't simply playing, she was dominating. She led her team in scoring, assists, and headlines. There were no signs of struggle, no injury reports, no absences from practice. She was the spark who filled arenas, boosted television ratings, and brought in an entirely new generation of fans. Then, suddenly, she was gone. No warning, no explanation, just silence. The shock spread instantly, catching fans and media off guard. Within minutes, speculation took over. Some pointed toward load management, the term often used to disguise fatigue or minor injuries. Others wondered if it was some vague disciplinary matter. But the theories didn't align. Clark hadn't broken team rules. She hadn't created locker room tension. By all accounts, she had been doing everything right, on and off the court. That's why her disappearance felt less like a benching and more like an erasure. Something deeper was taking place, and everyone watching sensed it. Then whispers began to leak from behind closed doors. Sources with knowledge of internal league conversations revealed a growing tension between Clark and certain high-ranking officials. Her rise wasn't just about her scoring ability, it was about her voice. Post-game interviews had become headline moments. Clips of her blunt honesty were circulating across social media, reaching millions. She wasn't following the unspoken rule of blending in. She was standing out, and not everyone in leadership seemed comfortable with that. One rumor in particular set everything ablaze. In a private meeting, Clark allegedly challenged the league's marketing direction, calling it out of touch with fans. She didn't soften her words, and she didn't hold back. According to those present, the exchange landed badly. Within 48 hours, her minutes on the floor started shrinking. Within 72 hours, she was sidelined completely. What followed was worse. There were no press conferences, no interviews, and no clear statements from the league. It felt as though someone had flipped a switch, turning one of the game's brightest stars into a ghost. But her supporters refused to let her disappear. Hashtags connected to her name began trending within hours. Social media comment sections filled with outrage. Calls for transparency echoed across platforms. Thousands of fans demanded answers. NBA players joined the conversation, describing the league's handling of Clark as calculated and damaging to the sport's credibility. Every unanswered question fueled greater suspicion. The silence from leadership only amplified the backlash. What began as confusion was evolving into resistance. For the first time, the WNBA isn't just battling controversy, it's facing its own fans. As Sophie Cunningham's voice adds fuel to the fire, one haunting question remains: can the league withstand the storm if its silence keeps fueling rebellion? Sophie Cunningham lit the match that turned a tense silence into a roaring fire. When Caitlin Clark disappeared from the spotlight, the absence was deafening. Fans searched for answers, reporters chased leads, and the WNBA's leadership stayed quiet. Then Sophie stepped forward, and everything changed. It happened during what should have been a routine post-game interview. Reporters expected standard remarks, polite cliches, rehearsed phrases. Instead, Sophie spoke directly, without filters. Her words cut straight through the silence. "You don't sideline your biggest star unless you're afraid of her power." The moment she said it, the room froze. Reporters leaned closer, stunned by the bluntness. And before the league could even prepare a response, that clip had gone viral. Within hours, it spread across TikTok, Instagram, YouTube channels, and podcasts. Fans replayed it again and again, sharing it like an anthem. Yet Sophie wasn't stopping there. What could have been dismissed as a one-time outburst became a sustained campaign. On her own podcast, she doubled down. Sophie accused the league of retaliation, suggesting Clark's benching had little to do with basketball and everything to do with power. She argued that leadership was more focused on control than progress, more interested in guarding authority than celebrating the talent that kept fans watching. Her words struck a nerve because she went further than most players dared, voicing what many had whispered privately: that Clark's situation felt like a warning meant to intimidate anyone who spoke too boldly or shone too brightly. The message spread quickly. Sophie repeated her stance in team meetings, live interviews, and broadcasts. She showed no signs of backing down. To her, the real risk wasn't fines or reduced playing time. It was letting the league quietly sideline one of the most important athletes of this generation. She insisted that silence would mean complicity, and she wasn't willing to play along. Fans rallied behind her. Social media transformed outrage into coordinated support. Hashtags like Stand With Sophie and Free Clark trended across multiple platforms, carried by thousands of voices. What started as one fiery statement became a movement. Supporters praised Sophie for refusing to stay quiet, calling her the only player willing to take real risks to defend Clark. The WNBA had not anticipated this wave of defiance, and it spread faster than anyone could contain. The issue was no longer just Clark's sudden absence. It had become a question of the league's credibility. Sophie Cunningham had forced open a door leadership hoped would stay shut. And behind it stood truths capable of reshaping the future of the game. What began as Caitlin Clark's unexplained absence now feels bigger than a single player. It has grown into a story that threatens the very stability of the league itself. The silence around her situation was already overwhelming, but into that silence stepped a new voice, Lexie Hull. And with that, the controversy escalated to a new level. Sophie Cunningham had already shaken the walls with her defiance, but the storm grew fiercer the very next day. Lexie didn't arrive with a carefully drafted statement, a polished podcast, or scripted lines. Instead, she walked straight into the press room after practice, locked her eyes on the cameras, and delivered a single sentence that cut deeper than any long speech. "If Caitlin Clark can be treated like this, what do you think they'll do to the rest of us?" The effect was immediate. Reporters stopped writing. Players standing quietly in the back shifted uncomfortably. And within minutes, the clip burst out of the women's basketball bubble and into the wider sports world. Suddenly, it wasn't only WNBA fans asking questions, it was anchors on ESPN, commentators on YouTube, and voices across podcasts, all repeating the same stunned reaction: what exactly is happening behind closed doors at the WNBA? But Lexie wasn't done. Only hours later, she posted a striking black and white photo of herself standing alongside Caitlin Clark. The caption was just one word: loyalty. That single word sent shockwaves through fans and insiders alike. Was she signaling betrayal inside the locker room? A direct shot at management? Or a warning to teammates under pressure to stay silent? Nobody knew for sure, but the timing was impossible to overlook. The vagueness only fueled speculation, and the tension around the league continued to rise. Behind the scenes, reports suggested Lexie had become one of the loudest voices in team meetings since the controversy began. One account described her directly confronting coaches, demanding answers as to why the league's biggest draw, the player selling out arenas, was now anchored to the bench. According to insiders, her teammates backed her up. What began as whispers of internal division quickly spilled into headlines, painting a picture of a locker room straining under the weight of secrecy. And it wasn't just limited to her own team. Lexie hinted that players across multiple franchises were holding quiet conversations away from league officials and cameras, sharing their frustrations about how Clark's situation was being managed. The pressure to remain silent was heavy, but so was the growing determination among younger players who were tired of old politics. They wanted their voices heard, and Lexie was helping to rally them. Then came the tweets, cryptic, emotional, impossible to ignore. One in particular sent shockwaves before it was quickly deleted. "If you want to build a legacy, stop silencing the ones who create it." Fans screenshotted immediately, ensuring it would live on long after being taken down. Within hours, the quote was everywhere, on Reddit threads, TikTok edits, Instagram reels, and fan forums. Some believed it was aimed directly at WNBA executives. Others argued it was directed at media voices accused of downplaying the controversy. Regardless of interpretation, everyone agreed on one thing. Lexie wasn't just reacting to events, she was declaring open opposition to silence itself. Together, Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull had become a front line of resistance. Two players willing to risk their careers by saying publicly what so many others kept hidden. Their defiance transformed the narrative. It was no longer just about Caitlin Clark. It was about whether athletes would be allowed to speak freely in a league built on their talent. And the fans responded. If Sophie had lit the fire and Lexie had fueled it, the fans became the wildfire. Outrage quickly transformed into a digital uprising so loud that even the league's leadership could no longer ignore it. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, every platform erupted at once. Hashtags surged across timelines. Hashtag Justice for Clark, hashtag Free Caitlin, hashtag Stop Silencing Stars. Each carried more power than any official statement because they came directly from the people who filled arenas, bought jerseys, and streamed games. Within hours, the WNBA's own social media posts about highlights, sponsorships, even charity events were hijacked by waves of angry comments demanding answers. Sports forums, normally filled with debates over stats and strategies, became battlegrounds of frustration and suspicion. Fans weren't just asking questions anymore, they were demanding accountability. And this uprising wasn't contained by hashtags alone. It was evolving into something more organized, something the league could no longer treat as background noise. What had begun as confusion over one player's sudden disappearance was now reshaping into a broader rebellion. The silence from leadership wasn't calming the storm, it was intensifying it. And as Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull stood firm, the fans transformed from spectators into participants, determined to push the league into a moment of reckoning. The question had shifted. It was no longer simply, "Where is Caitlin Clark?" It was now, "How far will this defiance push the WNBA? Toward collapse, or toward rebirth?" Fans had turned into investigators. No longer content to wait for official word, they began doing what the league refused to do, examining every piece of evidence themselves. Game footage was slowed down, freeze frames pulled from crucial moments, and side-by-side comparisons created that exposed a pattern impossible to ignore. Clips circulated online of Caitlin Clark driving to the rim, taking heavy contact, only for referees to swallow their whistles. Other compilations highlighted her minutes steadily shrinking despite the fact that her box scores remained among the most impressive in the league. Fans noticed something else too. On the WNBA's own social media pages, posts featuring Clark began appearing less and less, replaced with highlights of others while their brightest star was gradually erased from the spotlight. The discoveries spread like wildfire. TikTok edits splicing together missed foul calls earned millions of views overnight. Reddit users dissected her playing time with forensic precision, charting minute-by-minute shifts that raised more questions than answers. Screenshots of league accounts, before and after the controversy, flooded Twitter, with fans demanding to know why Clark's presence had been intentionally minimized. The narrative was no longer limited to one player being benched. It had become a referendum on the credibility of the entire league. And the fans weren't whispering. They were shouting. "Why hide the star who brought us here?" one viral post demanded. Another asked the haunting question. "If they can erase Caitlin Clark, what does that mean for the future of the game?" These questions echoed louder with every retweet and every share. The outrage was no longer confined to online chatter. It had transformed into the heartbeat of a movement, pulsing through sports culture with a force no executive could contain. The storm raised one chilling thought. What exactly had the league unleashed when Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull decided to draw their line in the sand? Was this a rebellion? Or the beginning of a revolution? For nearly 2 days, the league remained silent, hoping the noise would fade. But the chants only grew louder. Players were beginning to speak openly, reporters were circling like sharks, and the controversy around Clark refused to die down. Finally, the WNBA broke its silence. What should have been a chance to calm tensions became a disaster. A polished statement appeared across official league accounts. Its tone was cold, sterile, and strangely detached from reality. It didn't name Caitlin Clark. It didn't acknowledge the accusations of silencing players. Instead, it reduced everything to a bland phrase: a strategic rotational decision. The message closed with an appeal for fans to trust the process. The backlash was instantaneous. Reporters shredded the vagueness. Fans mocked the detachment. Players themselves rolled their eyes. Far from quelling the uproar, the league's attempt at spin was seen as proof of a cover-up. Transparency was nowhere to be found. Instead, the statement felt like a calculated attempt to minimize an issue that had already spiraled into one of the biggest public crises in WNBA history. This wasn't 2004, where a press release could bury bad news. It was 2025, and fans had receipts. They had screenshots, timestamps, footage, and communities dedicated to amplifying every discrepancy. Attempts to rewrite the story only made it spread faster, louder, and with more ferocity. Then came the players' reactions, sharper and more effective than any press conference. Sophie Cunningham fired the first shot, a single eye-roll emoji posted to Twitter. No caption. No explanation. Within minutes, it had tens of thousands of likes. The message was clear. We see through this. Lexie Hull followed with a strike of her own. She reposted a clip of the statement being read aloud on air with a biting caption. So we're pretending this is normal now? The sarcasm cut through the corporate haze. Fans devoured it, turning her words into a rallying cry. Even veteran voices joined the chorus. A former WNBA star tweeted bluntly, "Rotational decisions don't erase your MVP candidate without a reason. Something else is going on, and it stinks." That one line captured the sentiment reverberating across the sports world. The fallout was swift and measurable. Jersey sales for Caitlin Clark, which had been shattering records, suddenly plummeted. Ticket refunds spiked in markets where fans had purchased seats solely to see her play. YouTube highlight reels that once overflowed with excitement were now flooded with comments like, "Rip to the only reason I watched." The momentum Clark had single-handedly built, the sold-out arenas, the new fans, the burst of cultural relevance, was unraveling at lightning speed. And this time, it wasn't just fans. Sponsors were watching. Their money, their partnerships, their branding, all tied directly to the league's image, were suddenly in question. Behind closed doors, the real danger was emerging. The question wasn't whether the damage had been done. It was how deep it would go. Would sponsors demand answers? And would their ultimatums decide the league's fate? Leaked reports soon revealed that at least 2 major brand partners had already contacted league officials privately, asking for clarification before continuing promotional campaigns. In the world of corporate diplomacy, that wasn't a request. It was a warning. Fix this or risk losing us. Sponsorships that had taken years to secure were suddenly dangling by a thread. Yet, unbelievably, the league doubled down. No follow-up statement. No interviews. No apology. Just more scripted messaging behind the scenes. As players and fans grew louder, the WNBA seemed determined to spin the story into silence. But they failed to grasp a timeless truth. When you try to silence one voice, a dozen more rise up. And that's exactly what began to unfold. Inside locker rooms across the league, alliances started forming. Conversations once dominated by scouting reports now turned to whispered strategy about what to do next. Some players avoided eye contact, unsure of who would stand with them and who might side with the league to protect a career. The situation had shifted beyond controversy. It was radioactive. Sources close to multiple teams described fractures forming: veterans versus newcomers, silence versus defiance, loyalty to the badge versus loyalty to truth. The cracks widened every day. At the center of the storm stood Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull. They had already risked their reputations by speaking out. But when the online outrage finally seemed to cool ever so slightly, they struck again. And this time, they weren't reacting. They were leading. In a joint interview broadcast live across major sports networks, Sophie and Lexie sat shoulder to shoulder. No smiles, no diplomacy, just raw conviction. Sophie went first. Looking directly into the camera, she delivered words that rippled across the internet. "If this is how you treat the player who built your league, no one's safe." The silence in the room was palpable. Reporters, usually quick with follow-ups, were stunned. Because Sophie wasn't just talking about Caitlin Clark. She was talking about every player who had ever been told to keep quiet or risk everything. Then came Lexie. Her words were shorter, but just as sharp. "We've been told to stay quiet for too long. Not anymore." The line in the sand had been drawn. Within minutes, clips of the interview went viral. Analysts called it the most honest moment in WNBA history. Fans erupted in support. NBA players reposted the footage with fire emojis and clapping hands. Even rival WNBA stars, some of whom had stayed silent until then, began liking and sharing the video, adding captions like, "Finally," or "Say it louder." The movement was no longer a spark. It was a blaze. Hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag players over politics. Hashtag let them speak. Hashtag save women's basketball. Fans weren't just venting anymore. They were organizing. Petitions circulated, urging sponsors to side with the players or risk boycotts. Independent media outlets began publishing deep dive investigations into the league's internal politics. Former players, long silent, stepped forward with their own stories of being benched, fined, or threatened for speaking out. Suddenly, the controversy wasn't just about Caitlin Clark. It was about the entire league. Every executive, every policy, every shadow decision. The walls of secrecy were crumbling, and at the center stood Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull, two players who refused to step back. And so, the question loomed larger than ever. Had the WNBA reached a breaking point that could rewrite the league forever? Or was this merely the beginning of a revolution?